You are listening to Meet the Thriller Author, the podcast where I interview writers of mysteries, thrillers, and suspense books. I am your host, Alan Peterson, and this is episode number 119. In this episode of the podcast, we'll be meeting Dan Padavona, who is the best-selling author of the Darkwater Cove Psychological Thriller series. His latest book in that series, Don't Breathe, will be published on October 29th. It's available for pre-order right now. Highly recommend you go check that out. Really enjoy his stuff. I'm a big fan of serial killer thrillers, so highly recommend you check Dan's books out. Dan was born and raised in Cortland, New York, which is not far from the Finger Lakes region. He lives in upstate New York there with his family, and he's a meteorologist with the United States government and published his first novel in the horror genre back in 2014. So during this interview, we talked about writing serial killer and psychological thrillers, horror, all while working full-time as a meteorologist and still finding time to write, publish, and market his books. Really enjoyed talking to Dan about his writing process, his books, and a whole lot more. So check out my interview with Dan Padavona. But first, a quick reminder, please check out my website at thrillerauthors.com. You'll be able to access my other interviews there, as well as the show notes and resources for this interview. And please do take a moment to rate and review this podcast. Wherever it is you're listening to it, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, wherever it is you're listening to this or you subscribe, by rating and reviewing this podcast, it boosts the algorithms on those directories and helps other people find the podcast. So I really would appreciate that. All right, here's my interview with Dan Padavona. How are you doing this morning, Dan?
Great. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, well, I guess it's afternoon already. I'm losing track of time.
Yeah, that's all right. Yeah, the sun's out. It's all good.
I'm so fascinated with your background because I've never met a meteorologist. So can you tell us how you go from being a meteorologist to writing thrillers?
As many people tell me, it's the perfect job because I get to be wrong 90% of the time and still get paid. Yeah, I don't know. That's one of the jokes that always floats around on the internet. But it's something that I didn't initially go to school for. When I first went to college, I thought that I would be like a sports broadcaster. And I went through the motions, and I was nearing the end of my degree when I realized I may be good at this, but I really don't like it at all. I was just bored stiff, but I realized that I was fascinated by severe weather and tornadoes and things like that. So I went back to school for that, and I'd been an active reader my entire life, but I never seriously got the writing bug until I became an adult. And, maybe it was just, a mid-40s midlife crisis type deal or something, but I needed to do something creatively with my life and step out of my comfort zone, so to speak. And I decided to write, and I'd read a few books in those last few years that inspired me greatly. They just they made me want to write, made me want to create as well. And I just started to get into to writing, and I actually began as a horror writer. And I produced about a dozen novels, and it just wasn't happening for me. It wasn't getting anywhere. I switched to thrillers, and it was like the light bulb just went off. I had a larger reader base, and I think that I was more attuned to writing thrillers. It seemed to be more in my wheelhouse somehow. And I think that the readers sensed that in the books, and it just made for better books, and it kind of snowballed into my success.
There is some little similarities between a horror and a thriller. What do you think is the main difference between the two?
I think the thriller doesn't go quite as far as the horror. With the books that I like to write, I tend to straddle the line between thriller and horror, the kind of the way like a Thomas Harris does or a T.R. Reagan does. So I'd say a psychological or serial killer thriller, you'll still get the killer in the background, killing people in all sorts of gruesome ways, but you may not get that full screen picture of the gore as it's taking place. And it's also more likely that you'll see the story take place from a different perspective. So with like a horror movie, and I'm getting pretty cliched here, but Michael Myers is stalking Laurie Strode, so you see everything from the point of view of the babysitters or the victims. In the case of a psychological or serial killer thriller, you're often the detective and you're trying to catch Michael Myers. So it ends up being a little bit different twist, and a little bit. I think it activates, the mystery aspect of it for readers and gets them more involved in the plot.
And so, how would you describe your books for the listeners who might not be familiar with your work?
Yeah, so again, I think they're very close to that line between thriller and horror. I tend to call them psychological thrillers. Not everything that I write does include a serial killer, although I think the vast majority do. I also write a very high tension, action flowing, page turning style. I don't like to leave any room for people to breathe. So I feel like I write the way that I like to read. I don't like the slow parts. I don't like the boring stuff. I mean, sometimes it's really good for character development, but for the most part, I want to keep that story flowing, whether I'm a reader or a writer. So I just try to keep the tension high, and I try to make it so that my readers, if things are tense, they feel like they just can't escape. This is going to be surrounding them until they shut down the Kindle or close the book.
And your latest book, is that Find Her Before Dark? Is that your latest, or?
Yeah, and by the time that this airs, I think we'll also have Don't Breathe, which is book 6 in the Darkwater Cove series. That will be out too, and that should wrap up the series.
Okay, cool. And then, how did you come up with the Darkwater Cove series idea? How did it all come into place for you, and how's been the journey through these 5-6 books?
Boy, that's really hard to say. I think I was reading a lot of, I mentioned her already, T.R. Reagan and L.T. Vargas. And yeah, absolutely. I love those writers. And as I was reading them, some storylines started to fall into place for me. And I had this vision of this profiler with the FBI's behavioral analysis unit. And I kind of played a little what if game in my mind. What if this analysis person was hunting like a legendary killer, and this killer kind of saw her as the one person who could catch him, and therefore the hunter became the hunted. And so at this point, the killer at the beginning of book 1 has laid a trap for Darcy Geller, who's the FBI's analysis person, profiler. And he lures her into this house, stabs her. She manages to fire a gun and wound him, and he ends up in a federal penitentiary serving a life sentence for all the brutal murders that he did. And at that point, it seems like, okay, that's a weird way for book 1 to start. Where's this going to go? She decides that this has torn her life apart. She decides that she cannot serve with the FBI anymore. She wants to put her life together. She takes her family and she moves to kind of like the anti-Washington, D.C. or anti-Quantico. They go to this quaint little village on the North Carolina coast called Genoa Cove. And it has a nickname which they call Darkwater Cove. Just it's based on how dark the cove gets because of the cliffs which face it. And once she gets there, we start to see that all of these things that have happened to her up to this point have played a role in tearing her down. She's abusing anti-anxiety meds. She's also has a second addiction, and that is to check the criminal database every single day, because she has this paranoia that the next time she looks, she'll find that this killer has escaped or that he's not in the system anymore. They let him out. So she just has this constant paranoia, and I tried to make it a bit like a Hitchcock style, where you always feel this dread that there's something wrong in the background, and then as she's there, a dead body surfaces on the coast, and the evidence seems to point towards this killer that she put away, and she contacts the FBI. Her contacts tell her, no, he's still behind bars. And then another victim shows up, and it all seems to keep pointing to the same person having done it. And that's kind of where the story takes off. So that's like, you get all that in like the first couple chapters, and then boom, it starts to hit you with the tension after that.
Yeah, and I read that your first book. It is a very. I like the atmosphere that you set for her, like the paranoia and like yeah, like it was in her head. Is it real? And it was a very enjoyable thriller. Serial killer thrillers are my favorite type of subgenre. So.
Yeah, me too. I mean, it's such a treat to write them. They're a lot of fun.
And now, did you? I was wondering too. I always ask when male authors writing female protagonists. Do you find it a challenge to write for Darcy? Were you worried about that, or the dumb question probably? Yeah?
I kind of did it already in my previous series, the Scarlet Bell series, which was kind of a Criminal Minds meets Hannibal Lecter meets Jason Bourne type scenario. It was a real mishmash that people really dug. But I wrote things from the standpoint of Scarlet Bell, and I'd wondered, could I do it? And I had a couple female protagonists when I wrote horror, and I felt pretty confident that I could handle Darcy's character. I went through a lot of things when I was young. With anxiety and whatnot, and I felt like I could instill some of the things that I went through with her, that things across gender, things that all humans deal with, and I wanted to keep her human. I didn't want her to make her a superhero, and I think once I did that and realized that we had some things in common, she became quite easy to write for. But on the other hand, I'm planning a next series, which is going to have multiple protagonists, which will switch between, but a few of them are male. And as I've started to think of themes, I'm actually really loving it, because I feel like I can relate a little bit more.
So what's your process like then? Like your writing process, from the time you get the idea, do you start writing it and publishing it?
I tend to subscribe to efficiency as much as I possibly can, and the amount of books I have written over the last 2 years, sometimes I have to stop and think, wow, I really have done that. Where's my life going? Actually, I just feel it's a process, a daily process. Whereas every day I need to put in what I consider business time into this investment, and that means I still working full time. I have a family. I have a wife and 2 kids. We have 3 dogs. I'm surprised they're not barking at the moment, but they will. So I have a lot of outside interests as well, and there's only so much time I have in the day for writing. So a lot of people may give up at that point, but what I did was I said, okay, what I want to do is I want to devote an hour and 15 minutes every single day. It's just a lot of trial and error went into coming up with that number, but I found that I could fit that in even on a busy day. I could fit in an hour and 15 minutes. And then it became a matter of how fast can I write in an hour and 15 minutes. So I read a lot about writing fast and getting your thoughts out quickly, and staying as organized as you possibly can when you sit down to write. And I got to the point where I could easily knock out about 1,200 words in an hour. I've since gone a little bit above that. So hour and 15 minutes, I'm knocking out 1,750, 1,850 words per day. And when I'm not writing, after I finish my manuscripts, then at that point, if I'm not editing, I'm planning, and I'll put in the same amount of time every single day. So I'll sit down and I'll think about the next book which I'm going to write, and I'll make little notes of things. Well, it would be really neat if this happened, or what if this happened? That might be kind of scary. That might be very tense. I mean, I'll just make little notes like that, and then I'll start to plan out the book from there.
Well, that's awesome. I didn't realize you were still doing the meteorologist
Absolutely.
job. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Wow. Yeah. I really do love my job. It kills me sometimes with the hours, but I'm not that far from retirement, so I'm probably going to stick it out. And then once I retire, I may write a lot more.
So that's cool. You got 2 cool jobs, meteorologist and thriller writer. So
yeah, talking about burning the candle at both ends.
Yeah. So did you? You said before you enjoyed writing. Did you reading as when you were younger? Were you a fan of thrillers and horrors and those type of books?
Yeah, I grew up with the most famous horror writer of all time, who I actually consider to be somewhat of a thriller writer as well, Stephen King. So, I mean, even when I was 10, 11, 12 years old, I remember I had an aunt who lived next door who loved horror and loved Stephen King. So she would let me borrow the paperbacks. So I would, most kids, doing whatever, I would kind of sneak off with The Shining, Salem's Lot, or something like that, something really creepy. And some of those books I found it very hard to get through because they were that scary. But I really was moved by the way people could create worlds, and I think that's probably what fascinated me most about what he did. And then eventually encountering The Stand and books like that just really made me think and want to create in that way someday. I also love to read fantasy. I don't think I would ever write fantasy, but I love to read it. And a gentleman named Patrick Rothfuss, who wrote the Kingkiller Chronicles, his first two books were just so brilliant that, and I was so moved by them that I decided that I really do need to give this writing thing a try. So I credit him a great deal with getting me to finally start to write.
I was also wondering too, and you probably get this a lot, and I hate bring it up, but I have to ask you because I was doing my research about you for the interview, and you have a very famous dad, of course, Ronnie James Dio. I loved him growing up, a child of the '80s. So and being the man that he's kind of credited with inventing the devil horn signs, did that environment at all inspire you to write horror, or not? That's just different music and writing.
I think that in general, wanting to be a creative probably comes from my father. I was never. I shouldn't say I was never a musician. I played in various bands as youth, and I still love music to this day, and especially really hard stuff. But I just never had the talent to either sing or to play guitar or to be an expert drummer. So I was kind of always felt like I'd be on the outside looking in. I'd always be kind of a mediocre musician if I ever went that route. But it didn't stop me from wanting to create. So I think that he played a role as far as making me want to create in some way. I regret the fact that he passed 10 years ago, and I didn't start writing until 2014. So he never got to see me hit this point as a writer. I think he really would have gotten a kick out of it, and I would have loved for him to be one of my first readers.
Yeah, that's same thing with my dad. Was always encouraged me on my writing. He passed in 2005, like 10 years before I wrote anything. So yeah, I get that too. It's like, I wish he would get such a kick out of it.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
You're working on several series, and you have other series out. And do you usually work on one at a time, or do you like juggle different projects at one time? I'm just kind of curious about that with authors that have multiple series out.
I do work on one series at a time. I'm rethinking that for the future because sometimes you get so engrossed with this world that you need a break from it. And I really started to feel that towards the end of this Darkwater Cove Darcy Geller series, where I still am very proud of book 6, which I just pretty much finished the manuscript on 2 days ago. I really think that that's going to turn out to be a good one and a great way for the series to go out. But I could also feel, too, that I've just been in this world a little bit too long, and I think that I need to move on. But it also could be, too, that the Darkwater Cove series is based around that, like that first book, that incredible tension, this unknown killer tracking her in the shadows. And you can only do that so many times. So the first couple books are very much along that vein as she's trying to figure out, who's this person who's trying to kill her. But as you get into the later books, she's more, she's back to, being the profiler again. And we're kind of like changing the plot line a little bit. So, the next series, which I write, is going to be more of like a rural, small town, rural story taken from the viewpoint of a sheriff's deputy, and he's very talented. He's going to be somebody who's kind of taking a job just to kind of come back home and get his life back together as well. And I think that one has a lot more legs because it's not like the same slash and stalk type storyline. You try to get it to book 6 and it gets difficult, but you can always come up with a new mystery. And I think that this one may have more legs and may be able to go farther. But it wouldn't be a bad idea, though, to try to do 2 series at once, maybe put out a book or 2 and then take a break, put out a book or 2 of the other one, and just kind of give yourself that little shot of creative juices again.
That new series sounds like a lot of fun. That's one of my favorite writers is John Sanford. I don't know if you read him. He does a small cop in Minnesota.
Absolutely. Yeah. His this first Prey series book, I mean, just really blew me away, and that was a bit of a inspiration for the first Scarlet Bell book. I really love that hard-boiled, hard-edged approach that he has. He's definitely a favorite writer of mine.
And so I always ask guests about the tools of the trade. What do you use to write? Do you use Word or Scrivener or something else?
It's Scrivener, and the only reason it's Scrivener, Scrivener can do amazing things as far as like tracking characters and whatnot. I don't use any of that stuff. I just don't want to get into it. All I want to do is I want to have like a doc inside of my Scrivener project where I make some notes about characters and whatnot, and then I just kind of refer to that doc whenever I need to. I have not done cards for each individual character or each individual town. I just can't be bothered with that much. The main reason I went to Scrivener is because Word and the copycat type programs out there tend to leave little extra characters in there. Mm-hmm. Little character codes that we don't see, but they're for the program's benefit and the document's benefit. And that can play havoc when you're trying to create like a Kindle file. And some of this stuff will start showing up. I think that it's less of a problem now. But also when I first wrote Storeberry, which was the first book I wrote, which is basically a love story to Salem's Lot, I hit the point where when I was trying to make a Kindle file out of it, that I just couldn't figure it out. I mean, I was going to so many different websites and trying to find this plugin and that plugin, and finally somebody just said, "You ever try Scrivener? You just download the Moby plugin and you create a Kindle file right out of that." And I was like, "Oh, okay." So, the very next day I got Scrivener, and I was like, wow, I made a Kindle file in like a minute after spending the last week trying to make one in Word. So, why would I ever go back? So I just started from there, and I never went back. Although now I would like to get my hands on like a cheap Mac and get the Vellum program, which, everybody raves about for creating Kindle files and print books and whatnot. So that may be the next step.
Yeah, I'm a Vellum convert too. It's amazing.
Yeah.
But yeah, I love what you said that, because I hear a lot in the forums, the writing forums and stuff, that people always get overwhelmed with Scrivener, and it's like, just grab 2 or 3 things. You don't have to use them all. It's like.
Yeah, you really don't. I think it's great for people, especially for like screenwriters. Who need to keep track of all these different characters and all these different backgrounds. So I'm all favor in using it if you want to, and you should have some type of character data sheets. I prefer just to have them all in one little doc file that I can look at real quickly, just compare characters and make little notes as I go along. Well, maybe this should have happened in their background as well. The last book or this last series, I know that I messed myself up twice by giving the character blonde hair when he was supposed to have dark hair. So, and thank God for my beta readers for catching stuff like that, because it's like, well, maybe he dyed it. I don't know. Kids do anything these days.
Yeah, yeah, that's pretty cool up to it. And when I was doing my research before the interview, I was at your website and I saw you posted your big believer on the beats. Can you explain that a little bit? And I thought that was really cool. You had a picture on your website about your I don't want to call it an outline, but can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so story beats are kind of considered to be a waypoint in between pantsing and strict outlining. If you asked me to write a strict outline right now, I couldn't do it. I have not written a strict outline since I was required to do so in 11th grade English. So I think once I passed that test, I forgot how to write an outline. So I would have to look it up. And I just don't want to get that involved. I don't want my story to be that fleshed out to the point where I basically have nothing to write except for the words. That to me would be very boring. On the other hand, I don't think I've ever experienced true writer's block. And what I consider writer's block to be is fear rather than a lack of creativity. And you do face fear every day as a writer. You sit down and you see this blank page or this blank screen, and you realize I'm going to be at this for the next hour and a half, hour, 15 minutes in my case, and you damn well better come up with some ideas. It's a little scary. And so there were long periods of time when I was pantsing where I would go without writing, whether it be a week, a month, a couple months. And that is, it's almost like, falling off the wagon as an alcoholic. I mean, once you stop writing, things just fall apart from there, and it's hard to get back on that horse and write again. I decided that I needed something not only to keep me writing every day, but also to give me structure so that I can knock out words quickly. And story beats, the way I use them, is basically a couple sentences to describe every chapter that I see it as I outline that book. Again, using outline and quotes. So it may be something as simple as first girl dies, serial killer in the woods, and it's, second is police discover body. Here's your first clue. As who the killer is. And also the reason that I decided that I couldn't pants as a thriller writer is because, unlike horror, thrillers have a very strong mystery aspect to them. Now, there's certainly not like a tightly woven mystery usually, but there is a lot of whodunit, which goes on in thrillers. And it's just hard for me to plan out, try to keep my readers off balance, and also, come up with the different clues ahead of time as to, how do we know that this was the person who did it, or at least how can we rule out these other people as we go along, and process of elimination that way, figure out who the killer is. And I'm not talented enough to do that as a pantser, so I need somewhat of a roadmap. I think that's the best way to look at it. It's a roadmap. And believe it or not, it takes a long time to do these story beats, even though it's just a couple sentences per chapter. So when I'm not writing and I'm in the planning stage, I can usually do about 7 or 8 of these chapters per day. And a lot of the rest of the time, I'm just researching and thinking, and how could I get to this point without first getting to this point. So it's a lot of pre-planning, and I think if I didn't do it, my books wouldn't be nearly as good. But if I was a strict outliner too and didn't have any pantsing going on at all, and took away all that creative flair, I think my books would get kind of boring too. They would be very plausible, but also very boring.
That's fascinating. And that's interesting because I've interviewed a lot of authors over the years, and no matter what level they're at, everyone's got that fear and can I do this again? They're going to take it all away from me. So that's normal for the aspiring writers who are listening to this.
And I always wanted to be a pantser because the people who I respect most in this industry, people like Stephen King and Dean Koontz, and I love Koontz. I love everything that he writes. And by the way, he's a thriller writer. He's not a horror writer. Mm-hmm. He's always listed as like that number 2 horror writer to King. And I'm like, no, he's a thriller writer. He wrote some horror, but he's a thriller writer. But yeah, he's just so talented. So anytime he like does an interview where he talks about his process, I check it out, and I know that he pantses. But I also know that he does little tricks that I've taken on too. Like he'll write during the morning, and then to be efficient, he'll come back and he'll edit it in the evening, and tighten up the prose and whatnot, because he doesn't want to get to the end of the book and then see this mountain of editing ahead of him. He likes to know when chapter 1 is done. No, it's really done. It's and I did that for the first time with this series, this Darkwater Cove series, and I loved the results. Edit it later in the day, or at the very least, edit it the next day and do 2 chapters at once. And then when you finish that manuscript, you're really done. That's really a great feeling.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, that's something that I struggle with, because when I'm finished the first draft, then I got this mess that I have to go back and fix. So
exactly.
trying to stop doing that.
And it's always a mess, no matter how long you've been doing this, and no matter how many books you sell. It's always a mess after that first chapter gets written.
Yeah, and you mentioned before, like with the formatting and everything, and I think that's so cool of indie writers like yourself. And I mean, we wear a lot of hats, and I know that a lot of indie authors struggle with that. Any advice for a writer trying to figure out there's like marketing and Facebook ads and blah blah blah. It just goes on and on.
Yeah, again, for me, it's efficiency. I keep going back to that. Have a plan for when you're going to write, and make sure that is your priority. You get the words done. You will at some point need to wear those other hats with marketing, but don't let it overwhelm you. A certain amount of marketing, I think, is required for everybody, and especially for an unknown author, whether they're traditionally published or they're indie, like I am. Chances are nobody knows your name outside of a small circle. I sell a lot of books these days, and I guarantee you I could walk down the street and nobody's heard of me. So it's really easy to stay under the radar as a reader or as a writer. It also means, though, that there's this huge untapped market, which is always out there waiting for you as well. But never think that everybody already knows you, and that your work just isn't good enough. You need to get your books in front of the right eyes. So do a lot of market research. Who do you write most like? Who would fans of author A, would they dig you, or would they dig some other writer? And if you think that there's a match there with you, then try to brainstorm ways to attract those readers. You're not taking readers away, because we can only write so many books in a year anyway. There's plenty of readers to go around, and plenty of books to read. But think about, like, can you market directly towards them on Facebook? Are there fan groups that you can market to? With Amazon ads, you can market directly to author names. You can market directly even to like ASINs and ISBN numbers. I mean, it's pretty amazing. You can get very granular. So if you think that, like in my case, if I come up to believe that I think a lot of people who read Salem's Lot would really like my Storberry vampire novel, then I can target that book directly. And just do that, but don't overwhelm yourself with it. Come up with like a set amount of time you want to work on this per week, and try not to go over that, because you can just get bogged down in all this advertising stuff, and it quickly gets to be not that fun. Whereas writing, that's what the next book sells the previous book. That's the old adage, and I think that is true. But you still do need to find those initial readers if you're like 99% of us, and people just outside of a small niche haven't heard of us.
Yeah, I think that's great advice too, and I know especially with traditionally published writers, like you said, most of them get very small advances, so they don't get a lot of marketing support. So it really is up to them. and the publisher expects them to market it themselves. So yeah, you can't. I think unless you get a really huge contract or something, the days of I just want to write, those days are gone. I think. I mean, even Stephen King still goes out and markets after he finishes a book. So.
Somebody, I can't even remember what article I read this in, but somebody had done the math and discovered that J.K. Rowling has only reached 8% of potential readers.
Wow.
So
that's crazy.
Yeah, she's vastly underperforming. She could like 12 times, her sales, if she just got on that advertising bandwagon.
Oh yeah, she's she's so lazy. She's she could be worth $2 billion instead of $1 if she just put some effort into it.
Yeah, I'm sure you could play the same games with King and Kuntz and everybody, but it does show though that there's just so many readers out there, and we can't write enough books to keep up. Somebody told me in a review the other day, hey, I read the first 3 books in the Darkwater Cove series in 2 nights, and now I'm starting book 4. When is book 5 coming out? And I'm
wow.
Thank you, number 1. That's great, but I can't write as fast as you can read. Yeah, so here's my friend here. So why don't you try one of their books as well?
Yeah, the reader expectations, they've gotten very impatient now of wanting more and more.
But they're the best, though.
Yeah.
We call them whale readers. That's kind of like the little industry term amongst the indies. These are people who they love a series, and not only do they love a series, but they a lot of them are Kindle Unlimited readers. Mm-hmm. So you won't even see the sale; you'll just see the page reads, growing and growing day after day. And these people will sit down. If you have a 6 or 10 book series, they will read it straight through, and they won't even blink, and they'll be done with it like in a couple weeks or a couple months, and then they're on to your next stuff, or they're on to somebody else. So keep writing.
Yeah. Are you worried that you're going to get the people are going to be upset that you're ending the Darkwater Cove series, or?
Yeah, some might be. I mean, I still have people who are asking me, when's the next Scarlet Bell coming out? So, yeah, I think there's probably a better chance that I could write another Scarlet Bell, because those, again, they're kind of like a Criminal Minds type episodic setup, so that I could probably work on that and come up with 5 different scenarios for them to new adventures for them to go through. Darkwater Cove, though, I think that it played itself out, and I don't want to go back down there quite yet, but I do love that slash stalk tension, and I know that I'll write something like that again someday.
Cool. And I wanted a non-writing question, because I saw on your website that you've actually chased hurricanes. It's never met anybody that's done that. What's that like?
Tornadoes, actually.
Tornadoes, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, like the movie, like Twister.
Yeah, that was, again, that was what fascinated me to get into meteorology. Was when I was very young, I saw The Wizard of Oz, and the first time I saw a tornado, I was just am I really going to say blown away? Yeah, I guess I am. So anyway, after seeing that, I was absolutely fascinated by there could be something that frightening and that destructive in nature. And of course, the way that the Wizard of Oz did it, being Hollywood and whatnot, they just made it look like the apocalypse. It's just black everywhere, and it looks like it's night in the middle of the day. And in real tornadoes, a lot of times when the tornado is coming, it's actually light behind the storm, because the tornadoes tend to form at the southwest corner of a storm. So once I started to read about tornadoes, I just got more and more fascinated by them, and I realized that I'll never get over this until I finally see one for myself. And in order to see a tornado for yourself, you have 2 choices. You can sit around and wait for one to hit your neighborhood, which is not a good plan, or you can go out to the Oklahoma or Texas or something and spend a spring and follow them around and try to forecast where the next one is going to be. So that's what we did. Me and a couple other meteorologists, we went out to Texas and Oklahoma and Kansas and just chased tornadoes for the better part of 7 or 8 days, and it was great. I mean, seeing tornadoes pretty up close was crazy and frightening at times, but the adrenaline rush was really intense too. And once I did it, I was like, yeah, I'd like to do it again, but I don't need to do it again. And that's a big difference. I really needed to do it the first time, and now I think I would just kind of want to do it again.
That sounds awesome. Well, I don't want to do it, but it sounds awesome.
I don't blame you. Most people don't want to do it.
So where can readers find you? Your website is probably the best place to get started?
Yeah, either to go to danpadavona.com, which is spelled Padavona, or just search my name, Dan Padavona, on Amazon, and click on my author profile, and you'll see all my books.
Okay, and Find Her Before Dark is out now.
I'm also on Goodreads, too.
Oh, Goodreads. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, find it. Yep. And Don't Breathe is should be out by the time that this airs as well. So that will conclude the whole Darkwater Cove series. You can get all 6 books if you dig it. You can read right through. But yeah, I'm also on Goodreads too. I probably should mention that, because that to me is, I don't even treat it like, hey, I'm a writer and anything like. I don't think anybody on there really knows that I'm a writer, like in the groups that I'm part of. Mm-hmm. I'm just a huge thriller reader fan and fantasy reader fan. So if you want to interact with me and just talk about your favorite books, look for me on Goodreads. I'm always there, talking about my favorite books. It's just a great place to hang out as a reader. It's such an antiquated website, but the people there just make it great.
Yeah, it's like Amazon forgot about them after they bought them, I think.
They really did. I hear that they're planning a big facelift, but they really need to.
Yeah.
It is great, though. It's a great place to hang out.
Yeah. All right, Dan. Well, thank you so much for being on the podcast. I really enjoyed talking to you about your work and thrillers and horror. It was a lot of fun.
Thank you, Alan. Appreciate you having me on.
Thanks for listening to the Meet the Thriller Author podcast. Be sure to visit thrillerauthors.com to join the conversation, access the show notes, and discover great thrilling reads. If you enjoy the podcast, I'd love for you to subscribe, rate, and give a review to it, wherever it is that you're listening to this podcast, be it iTunes, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn, Spotify, wherever it is that you're listening to this right now. I would appreciate it. And please do check out my own thriller novels over at my website at alanpeterson.com. Until next time.